So, hello everybody, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our round table today about ensuring the preservation of and access to the records of temporary international courts and investigative mechanism, and a warm welcome also to all those who are joining us online. So my name is José Kirps. I'm currently president of the International Council on Archives and director of National Archives in Luxembourg, and it will be my pleasure to guide you through today's presentations. The event today is organized with our partners from Swiss Peace Foundation and the Swiss Federal Department on Foreign Affairs, and allow me to thank them most warmly for their support and commitment. Complementary to the panel that we are organizing today, I wanted to mention a letter that we sent some weeks ago to the Secretary General Antonio Guterres and the High Commissioner of Human Rights, Volker Turk. And this letter was signed by Swiss Peace and ICA and 8 or 9 eminent persons, asking to develop solutions to ensure the long-term conservation of records of these temporary criminal courts we are going to speak today. So as an introduction to our event, I would like to give you some more information. During the last 30 years, 6 temporary international criminal tribunals were established. The International Criminal Tribunals for the former Yugoslavia and for Rwanda, the Special Court for Sierra Leone, the Extraordinary Chambers in the Courts of Cambodia, the Special Tribunal for Lebanon, and the Kosovo Specialist Chambers. All of these, except the Kosovo Court, have or are closing. All have created massive bodies of records which are important to future understandings of the conflicts and to the history of the nations and of the development of international justice. Meanwhile, new institutions tasked to collect information like the International Impartial and Independent Mechanism for Syria and the High Commission for Human Rights Accountability Project for Sri Lanka. Yet the long-term future of the records of these courts and mechanism is very uncertain. 3, meaning Yugoslavia, Sierra Leone, and Kosovo, are in various spaces in The Hague. The Rwanda court records are in Arusha, Tanzania, and the Cambodian records are in Phnom Penh. The records of the mechanism created by the Human Rights Council are in Geneva, and records linked to the United Nations in New York are located there. No long-term archival solution is in place. While the UN archives are often the automatic place for archival custody, this requires extensive facilities, resources, and experience in handling the records of courts, prosecutors, and investigators which have continuing legal demands. The preservation and access to these archives are essential. The International Council on Archives, representing more than 150 countries and recognized worldwide as the most important forum for professionals and institutions involved in archives and records management, wants to stress the importance of access to these archives. For us, the issue of access to records is crucial. Temporary criminal courts create voluminous records of important and lasting significance. These records are key research resources for victims, for civic activists, for academics, for journalists, for educators, and successors to current court officials. Access to archives play a crucial role in preserving history, fostering transparency, and enabling research across various fields. So the Human Rights Council side event from today will highlight the challenge of the long-term solution for these archives and define recommendations through the expert inputs of former prosecutor at the Special Court of Sierra Leone, David Crane, who will be today with us online. Then we have an activist and director of a non-governmental organization from Lebanon, which is Monica Borkman-Slim, who's in our panel sitting here. And then we have a representative of Swiss Peace Foundation, Lisa Ott at my right, the chief of archives unit at the UN, Stephen Hofek, who will be there online, as well as an international archivist and current ICA member of Human Rights section, Trudy Haskam-Petersen, and they will discuss questions like the current status of the archives of the temporary courts and mechanism, the likely future uses of the archives, both in the near and long-term future, and so on. So each of them, of our panelists, will have 5 minutes for his presentation, and then you will have, the audience will have the opportunity to ask questions during a discussion with the participants, and also our online participants will have the opportunity to ask questions. So let me welcome very warmly our 5 panelists who are with us today. And first of them is David Crane. Sorry, I'm looking for my papers. And David Crane is with us online. He's former prosecutor at the Special Court for Sierra Leone. He holds Juris Doctor degree from Syracuse University, a Master's of Arts degree in African Studies, and a Bachelor of General Studies in History. And so David Crane was the founding chief prosecutor of the Special Court for Sierra Leone. I already mentioned it. And he was the first American since Justice Robert Jackson and Telford Taylor at Nuremberg in 1945 to be the chief prosecutor of an international war crimes tribunal. So this is all I wanted to say about David Crane. And now, Professor Crane, the floor is yours, and we are listening to you. So for the public, for the attendants in the room, you have to wear your earphones in order to listen to Professor Crane. So please use your earphones to listen to his presentation. Okay. I give you the floor, Professor Crane.
Well, thank you, and I hope you can see me and hear me. And greetings from the Great Smoky Mountain National Park in North Carolina in the United States. I also want to thank and give my respects to the sponsors, as well as acknowledge this esteemed panel that I have the honor of being a part of. You know, it's very, very critical that we continue to ensure that the rule of law stays the cornerstone of international peace and security. And accountability for, international crimes is really critical for world stability, but most importantly for justice for the victims of international crimes. And when I was the chief prosecutor in West Africa, where we were in Freetown, Sierra Leone, I always reminded my office that the reason why we are here is to seek justice for the victims international tribunals need to stay focused on why they're doing their important work, and that is justice for the victims. Now, international courts not only provide that justice for victims, but they also create records and documents and evidence that need to be preserved. At the end of the day, these courts are really telling the world an important story about an atrocity zone, what took place there, why it took place. Because again, at the end of the day, this is the story of the victims. And I think that it's so critical because again, after the courts finish their important work, really it's the archives that remain and remain throughout time and tells that story of the victims. You know, there's all kinds of materials that tribunals, be it Yugoslavia, Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Cambodia, what have you, and of course our permanent International Criminal Court. You know, investigatory records are key as we begin that investigation in that atrocity zone. And what they are notes by the various investigators, what have you. But also we have, just importantly, witness statements that have to be preserved, as well as other materials and evidence, particularly demonstrative evidence, but evidence also that's gathered, crime scene evidence throughout the particular atrocity zone that also have to be preserved, but also are used in proving the cases. Other items that need to be preserved and archived for all time, of course, are the court documents themselves. It's very critical. You know, it's interesting. A chief prosecutor really is very focused on ensuring that the record of the proceedings are error-free, because if not, and if there is a permanent error in the record, then potentially that particular trial may be thrown out and we have to do it again. And at the international level, that's a very dangerous thing to do, is to prosecute once again various individuals at a very high level, to include a sitting head of state, which I investigated, indicted, and took down. And that was, for the first time in modern history, President Charles Taylor, who is currently sitting the rest of his life in a prison in United Kingdom. Not only are the court documents critical, but the record of the proceedings themselves that are being preserved by the registrar of the particular court, that is also very, very critical. And of course, just the day-to-day ancillary materials of an international tribunal, personal records, logistical records, all of those are also critical in the preserving of the history of that particular tribunal. So all of this has to be preserved. I recall when I was briefing the management committee, when I was getting ready to go over to West Africa in 2002, I told them at the end of my briefing, of showing them my 10-phase strategic plan of how we were going to do our work, beginning, middle, and an end. I told them that at the end of all of this, we're going to have some type of mechanism in order to preserve the archives and also have the ability for our indicted as well as our prisoners, so they have the ability to go and to seek some kind of redress. In other words, we have a legal obligation once we incarcerate somebody for international crimes, is to ensure they have the ability to seek redress and other matters, make various applications that prisoners do in domestic situations. And so that in reality, the particular courts at the time, Yugoslavia, Rwanda, and Sierra Leone, are going to, in fact, be around for as much as 40 or 50 more years after they complete their work. And I remember the management committee were looking at me kind of startled, and they had never thought of this, that in fact, we have to not only preserve their archives for history, but we also have to have the capability with those archives and all of the materials that I've discussed briefly related to what goes on in the international court and all of the documents there. But we're also going to have basically some type of mechanism, standby judges, prosecutor, registrar, to use those documents in case a convicted prisoner wants to make some kind of motion or something happens that it has to be reviewed. So not only do we want to preserve the archives, but we also have to have the capacity of remaining a judicial body for as long as we have prisoners incarcerated in the various places that they are incarcerated. So it's really critical that we do have these residual mechanisms, and we do. We do have residual mechanisms combined with Yugoslavia and Rwanda, and then we also have the residual mechanism for the Special Court for Sierra Leone. And something to think about, and perhaps we can discuss this in our question and answer. There is talk about combining the Special Court as well as the residual mechanism in Yugoslavia and Rwanda.
Okay. Yes.
So we have to make sure.
Professor Crane, could I just ask you to finalize your speech because we are running out of time? Thank you.
Thank you. I was just about to say we have to preserve these documents. History demands it. The victims demand. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Professor Crane, please stay with us till the end of the event, because maybe we'll have questions for you. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our second panelist, who is Monica Borkman-Slim, sitting at my left. Thank you very much, Monica, for being here today with us. So Monica is co-founder of UMAM for Documentation and Research from Lebanon, and she will present our topic for today under the perspective. There's like an echo somewhere. So sorry for that. Under the perspective of a local civil society organization and an activist who contributed to the work of an international mechanism. Monica Bergmann-Slim is a German-Lebanese journalist, award-winning documentary filmmaker, and archivist. She's an activist against what she describes as Lebanon's culture of impunity, countering official amnesia about the Lebanese civil war. She's the widow of the Lebanese filmmaker, archivist, and activist Lokman Slim, who was assassinated in 2021. In 2005, Monica Borkman and Slim founded the Human Documentation and Research Center to build a citizen archive accessible to the general public and to raise awareness within the Lebanese population on the subjects of war and violence to the arts, exhibition, publications, and film screening. So thank you, Monica, and I give you the floor, and please go on.
Thank you so much, Jose. Is it on?
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yes, okay. So thank you so much, Jose, and I will start with a little bit of background. On February 14, 2005, a massive car bomb targeted and killed former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri in Beirut. On May 1, 2009, 4 years later, the UN established Special Tribunal for Lebanon, also known as STL, began its work to try those responsible. In 2020 and 2022, the STL issued 2 verdicts in absentia against 3 members of Hezbollah. Also, in 2022, news started to spread that the STL might close because of lacking funding. On December 31st, 2023, the UN closed the STL, and its website and published records went offline. With this decision, 14 years of the history of the Special Tribunal for Lebanon and therefore a part of the history of Lebanon seemed to be lost, at least for a certain time. Before the STL closed, I wrote them twice and declared the interest of our organization, to host the public archives and to render them publicly accessible. I was informed that the records would go to the UN in New York. I'm here to speak about the importance of these records, why it is so important to keep them publicly accessible. And I will name here only two major reasons. Reason one, while other special tribunals have dealt with war crimes and crimes against humanity, the STL was the first tribunal that tackled a political crime that targeted a specific person, or in other words, a political assassination. And since its independence, Lebanon has been plagued by political assassinations, and this is ongoing until today. Allow me a personal note. One of the last victims of this phenomena was my husband, Lukman Slim, who was assassinated in South Lebanon in February 2021. As political assassinations are executed for political reasons, these assassinations may be connected and interlinked, and their perpetrators might be the same. This was the reason why the STL established also jurisdiction over the cases of 3 other political assassinations of Lebanese politicians: Marwan Hamadeh, who survived, and George Howie and Elias Moore, who died. Even if these cases are today in limbo, and even if until today there is no instance to follow up on them, the STL archives are needed for future attempts to prosecute and attain justice for such other political assassinations. Reason 2. The archives of the STL are a gold mine, not only for judges and lawyers, but also for historians, researchers, activists, and anybody who want to break the cycle of the culture of impunity that is prevailing over Lebanon. This is because the archives are not just important for understanding how the STL worked and functioned, but for the data and details found to pertain Lebanon's past, present, and future. There is a need for engagement with the information found in these archives that other fields, such as historians, can utilize in ways other than the international law and justice can. Therefore, for both reasons, the records of the STL should be accessible today and need to be secure for the long-term future. Last sentence, on July 17th, almost 2 months ago, Stanford University announced that it has saved the STL website, had access to the STL records, and would make them public. Until today, only 64 records were made public. Apart that this is not known in Lebanon, there are also questions: what are the guidelines? Will all public records be published? What is happening with the private records? What is the timeline? A lot of questions are remaining open. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica. So in fact, these are very crucial questions, the one you mentioned at the end. We will then move on to our third panelist, which is Lisa Ott, sitting at my right. And Lisa is the head of the Dealing with the Past program at the Swiss Peace Foundation. She joined Swiss Peace in 2014 and focuses on archives and dealing with the past, enforced disappearances in the framework of the right to truth and the prevention of violent conflicts. Before joining Swiss Peace, she worked with the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Colombia to support its human rights monitoring, namely with view to the situation of human rights defenders at risk, reparations and land restitution in the context of the peace process. So, Lisa, thank you for being here today, and I give you the floor.
Is it? I don't see them. Thank you so much, Jose. I will be brief. I want to highlight that the information that we talk about, which is in the archives of these international courts, but also of other investigatory mechanisms, for example, commissions of inquiry created by the Human Rights Council, is relevant for many different purposes. We have on the one side the legal purposes, which David has already alluded to, and also Monica has. So for new criminal investigations in other countries, but also for ongoing criminal investigations or other judicial investigations, the information that is in these court records is relevant and therefore needs to be preserved, and needs to be preserved in a way that it's usable and accessible under certain circumstances. But the information that is in these records is also useful for other purposes. And they can all be linked a bit to this notion of the right to know. So the information that is kept in these records can, for example, be used or be useful in the search for disappeared persons, in processes that come later to the established mechanism, but also much more broadly in terms of history writing of the respective countries. We can also imagine that for education purposes, school books, this kind of information can be relevant and can be very practically useful in terms of educating about what has happened in the past and helping to create a conscious about what needs to be done to prevent such grave human rights violations to happen in the future. I think thirdly, a third purpose which is important to have in mind is research. It's a wealth of information that is kept in these documents on wars that were ongoing, systematic situations of repression, but also they show of activism of civil, they may have information about activism from civil society organizations, from indigenous communities, etc., which are relevant to understand the context at the time of when the crimes happened. So also to a broader research public, this information can be valuable. And I think after all, I mean, we cannot summarize all the potential purposes this information can have, but we have to remember that these mechanisms are usually established in a time where the institutions in the country themselves are deemed not to be able or not to be willing to investigate what is happening. So the international community steps in and creates such a mechanism, sort of stepping in to fill that void. And what is it for? At some point, further down the line, hopefully the institutions in those countries will be able and willing and interested, and also the public to use that information, and that information sort of fills a gap often of what the domestic actors have at the time. So I think it's really important to have in mind that in the moment when these mechanisms are created, to have sort of this long-term view that ideally this information can be useful beyond the specific mandate of that institution, and hopefully for domestic use under the, of course, conditions of confidentiality and taking into account privacy rights of those who are mentioned in the records, of course. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you for being in time. And so let's move on to Stephen Horfek, who should be there online. So we are waiting for having his
Hello, I'm
picture.
here.
He's there? Okay. So please use your earphones again to hear Stephen Horfek. Stephen Horfek, just some words to introduce you. So you are chief of the archives unit at the UN, and you have been working in archives and records management at the United Nations since 2006. And you started as an audiovisual archivist at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia after completing a master's degree in preservation and presentation of the moving image from the University of Amsterdam. So you are currently chief of the archives unit in the archives and records management section in the United States Secretariat at UN headquarters in New York. So, Stephen, please go on. You are online with us, so we cannot see you for the moment, but we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here. I should note that these are my views and not necessarily those of the United Nations. But yes, please let me speak briefly about capacity of the United Nations to manage records of temporary courts and investigative teams. Capacity both within the Archives and Records Management section at UN headquarters and within other entities in the UN system, specifically the courts and teams, which are the subject of today's panel. So to speak about capacity, we have to think about issues of resources and expertise, and therefore I think it's important to have an understanding of the scope and extent of the records we currently manage in the UN archives and the larger functions of the section. So we have only a handful of professional level positions and about a dozen support staff. With these resources, we preserve and provide access to some 16 kilometers of paper records and some 300 terabytes of digital records. The oldest of these go back to the 1940s, and the most recent are from this year. I should say there's other archives within the UN system located in different duty stations. I'm speaking specifically about the archives here in New York. And to ensure all these records are preserved and accessible, we manage specialized systems, digital and physical storage repositories, and all of the programmatic activities related to supporting that work. We make records available online and on site. Our website, for example, has about 5 million pages of declassified historical UN archives on it. But we also set standards for the management of records throughout their life cycle, and provide advisory services to all UN departments and offices, as well as all peacekeeping and political missions. So I mentioned peacekeeping and political missions here because the archives of these constitute about 40% of our holdings. This large percentage is attributable to the closure of peacekeeping missions over the last 25 years. And it's worth noting that peacekeeping rapidly increased in the post-Cold War environment, and upon the completion of their mandates, they transferred their records to the UN archives in New York and continue to do so. And I think a similar or parallel situation is happening now with the closure, either which has already happened, or the expected closure of temporary courts and investigative teams that have been created over the last decades. So like peacekeeping and political missions, the courts and investigative teams we're discussing today are also temporary, of course, meaning that the organizations within which they were created, within which the records were created, will at some point, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, cease to exist, and the records will need to be transferred to an archival repository with the capacity to continue managing them. This is largely where the similarities end, though, between temporary courts and investigative teams and peacekeeping and political missions. The mandates of the courts and teams that collected or created records, the nature of the records themselves, and the resources necessary to manage them over time are all very different from other UN bodies. So, although UN operations must always produce records to complete their work, generally speaking, those records are the byproduct of a different function. For investigative teams, however, including those within temporary courts, the collection or creation of evidence as a record is the goal, at least the immediate goal. Now, I understand, of course, that the larger goal is to use the evidence in judicial proceedings, to hold people accountable for crimes, to get justice for victims, of course. But because that larger context is often undefined, meaning the judicial context within which evidence may be used is unknown to the team collecting the evidence, the immediate goal is actually records creation and preservation itself, which is an interesting situation, but it also means that because this is the entity's mission, they've been resourced to do that collection and registration. They know they have the systems to do the searching and analyzing, to do the preservation, and provide access to the evidence in accordance with the applicable conditions or rules, procedures, policies, etc. And so this is a function that is unique to these entities. And unlike other UN entities, when they close, they cannot be easily transferred to the UN archives with the expectation that they will continue to be managed in accordance with those same standards, in the same systems, or with the same expertise. So in short, unless the international community ensures the creation of a permanent repository to manage the archives, and in particular the evidence of the UN's temporary courts and investigative teams when they close, it will be very challenging to ensure that such evidence remains accessible. Basically, the expertise, specialized systems, and resources for managing these archives only exist in the courts and teams that collected them. So when they close, those resources and that expertise also needs to be maintained and transferred with the archives themselves. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for this interesting information. And please stay also with us till the end of the event today in order to answer some possible questions. So let's then move on to our last panelist, Trudy Haskam-Petersen, at my left. Trudy is an archival consultant and certified archivist. She holds a PhD in history from the University of Iowa, and she spent 24 years with the US National Archives, including more than 2 years as acting archivist of the United States. Trudy consulted with truth commissions in South Africa and Honduras, the Special Court for Sierra Leone, the Nuclear Claims Tribunal of the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and the police archives in Guatemala. Among her many publications are Final Acts, a guide to preserving the records of truth commissions and temporary courts, permanent records, and you have also some publications from Trudy here. So at the end of the event, if you are interested, you could take them with you. Trudy received the International Ahmed Leary Award in 2018 for outstanding contribution to the records and information management profession. And last but not least, Trudy is a member of the International Council on Archives, and more specifically from the Human Rights section. So thank you, Trudy, for being here. Thank you for all your valuable work, and I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Jose. Let me simply talk about what needs to happen now. You've heard a variety of perspectives on how the records can be used. You've heard Stefan Halfeck on what needs to happen archivally. So let me suggest to you very simply, we believe strongly that the United Nations and the international community generally create a working group which will look at the issues that have been raised, look at, in the long term, how do we put a foundation under these records that ensures their preservation? That foundation is both financial and personnel. How do we do this? Sierra Leone court has promised that the records will be available in 50 years. How do we make sure that happens? We have to find a mechanism for funding over the course of time these materials. We believe this working group needs to include both lawyers and archivists, representatives of the communities of concern. We believe also that the working group should look at the issue of access protocols. And those access protocols cannot be simple. They have to be very complex. Access protocol should include access for future litigation, access for people seeking the records that show what has happened to the disappeared, and access for the larger historical and educational programs. So with those two mandates to the working group, that is the foundation for long-term preservation and developing an access protocol. So we do not do this every time there is a new court, every time there is a new commission. We need to get some sort of international floor under these processes, and we believe that the next step is a working group to look seriously at these issues and then propose to the community of nations, this is what we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trudy, for the proposal, for your perspective first, and for your proposal for a solution. So I think as ICA representative, this could be a very good proposal. So now we come to the end of the presentations from our panelists, and we have still 15 minutes to go. So if you have questions in the room or online, please raise your hand. And I see one hand over there. So you just have to open your microphone, and then you can ask your question or make your statement, whatever you wish. So please go on. And maybe you could present yourself.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. My name is Sandra Epalrat, and I'm with the International Commission of Jurists. And thank you so much for giving me the floor, but also really sincere thanks to each and every speakers for very useful and very interesting inputs and presentation. And this issue of archives is very important. It's a very important issue for ICJ within our broader work on accountability for human rights violations and abuses, and in particular, those that amount to crimes under international law. And the ICJ is particularly concerned about the long-term sustainability of the work of HRC-mandated investigative mandates, and to ensure that a fuller range of remedies for victims is ensured, and by ensuring their archives are accessible to accountability bodies in their variety. And as far as we understand, and I think this resonates with what Trudy Peterson just said, there are really different approaches, or seems to be very different approaches to that have been adopted at the conclusion of different country mandates, with residual OHCHR or archive staff left to respond to any request for information that may be received. And this obviously affects not only UNITAD, but different mechanisms, preservation with preservation mandates or evidence preservation mandate that have been created by the HRC. I think it also resonates with some of what Stephen Hofek said. And we think that while the emphasis on reporting to the HRC and to member states is really important, an equal emphasis should be placed on management of their evidence repository. And it should be reflected in the allocation of resources, obviously, for the development of sufficient internal procedures, digital technologies, and security infrastructure and staffing, obviously. Again, I think that was said, and it's very important. But to make materials accessible, they also need to be fully analyzed, digitalized, and indexed by experts who are working on the context before the conclusion of the mandate. And they could be then managed by a central repository mandated to process requests for access to records and the witness who provided them from international and domestic criminal justice authorities, which sustainably or substantially meet international fair trial and other human rights standards. And I'm not expanding much more on such a body because I think this is some of the elements that I think Stephen Hofek alluded to. And so actually my question was, with the IIIM and the IINN, but as well the residual mechanisms for the ICTY and ICTR, they have infrastructure in place to manage their archive in this way, in the way that I described, but with the potential limitation that, and so is it really time, or is it time for the UN to consider a long-standing solution for all such mechanisms, including commissions of inquiry and fact-finding missions, which will ensure that we are on the right path to achieve the objectives that the HRC sets out to achieve in establishing these mechanisms. And I think maybe especially Trudy Peterson and maybe Stephen Hofek, you want to just go a bit further in details about this. And I heard your proposal for a working group very clearly. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your statement. Stephen, would you like to answer to this question?
Yes, sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question, and I clearly agree. I think everyone on the panel would agree that there needs to be some kind of permanent function within the United Nations to deal with at least the archives of the UN tribunals and investigative teams. It's whether that's for judicial purposes, to support member states that wish to use any of this material in judicial proceedings on their own, whether it's for future use in international judicial contexts, whether it's for historical or research purposes, genealogical purposes, I mean, all of these things. And it is a very unique set of records that requires dedicated resources. Absolutely. So I don't have strong opinions on where or how that sort of function would be, or where it would be. I think it could be across different geographical locations. It could be in one geographical location. It could be in existing departments. It could be in a new department. All of those things I think need to be considered. But yes, I fully agree that that work needs to happen within the UN Secretariat.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for you.
Could
We have
come
one.
in, please?
We have one question from the online.
Yes, please. Well, it's not so much a
Participant.
question. Hello?
Yes.
Yeah,
Could
my
you
name's
please present yourself because we
Sure.
can't see you? Okay. Yeah.
My video is on, yeah.
Yeah.
My name is Jan Hesbrugger. I'm from the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. We have not been involved in the panel organization, but definitely would like to contribute to this process. And I just wanted to come in with some initial clarifications, right? Because we have two groups of mechanisms. I mean, there are the tribunals, but there are also the mechanisms mandated by the Human Rights Council. For these mechanisms, consistently, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights is the custodian of the archives already. So for Human Rights Council archives, we do have this central repository. I should say, within the High Commissioner for Human Rights, we have built up a professional team now located in a branch, not only to service ongoing investigations, but also to take care of the archives to make sure they're professionally preserved, secured, searchable, and deal with any requests for information coming in. So just to say that this already exists. I think where I agree is that so far, this part of the work, I mean, the commissions of inquiry and so on, they're getting a budget from the General Assembly. However, that budget typically doesn't include the money for the tail end of it after they wrap up. And so there's an ever expanding number of archives that need to be serviced and requests, and that is not built in. The Office of the High Commissioner has sought funding for at least a couple of positions in relation to that from the General Assembly in order to make the resourcing more sustainable, because we're employing not only human rights officers dealing with it, but also professional information managers, that have worked on managing criminal archives in other sort of first-rate organizations. But that is I think, a work line that is increasing. And that also needs to be sustainably funded, right? I mean, at this point only we have 12 investigative mechanisms from the Human Rights Council, right? Eventually they will wrap up, hand over their archives, and these need to be managed. And the increasing number of requests also from national courts and so on, they're coming in. So we are looking forward, and do please reach out to us to continue in that conversation that you are starting here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this supplementary information and also for your explanations. Thank you very much. So,
can I add something?
There is, yeah. That
Yes,
I don't
hi,
know who was asking for that.
Sorry, yeah, my name is Pauline van Kersen. I'm the former head of port management and archive services at the STL, so the Special Tribunal for Lebanon. And if you would allow me, two things in response to Monica's presentation. Thank you very much for that. I feel your pain also. Just to clarify on the Stanford projects for the virtual tribunals, the first launch of the STL records was in July. And just to let you know, the second launch will come hopefully either, well, in the second half of this year, so October, I hope, and that will then include all the public judicial records of the STL. Last year, when we were closing down, it was clear that there was no funding to keep our website in the air. And this is the solution that we came up for to ensure that the access to our judicial records for future was preserved. So that's one thing. The first launch was just an initial teaser, if you like, to say, listen, this is coming, and just rest assured everything will be available where it comes to public judicial records and the public information documents, regulatory documents. I would like to also, so that's one thing. And the other thing I would like to say that in the working group proposal from Trudy, I fully support that, and I hereby volunteer to sit on that working group. As we have gone through the closing of the tribunal last year, we came across a lot of issues that until you close, you're not really aware of. For instance, you have judicial decisions on protective measures for witnesses who are also not only named in judicial records, but also in administrative records for traveling, for instance. So you have a crossover of certain judicial issues that, that you have to take into account. So I hereby offer also myself to David Crane, if you, I'm not sure which committee it is, but please, reach out to me. I sent you a LinkedIn request. I think I have tons of experience that will help you come to a hopefully, long-term solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your offer. Thank you for your clarifications, and we got some good news from you. So thank you very much. I'm afraid we have come to the end of our event. So we don't have time to take one more question. I'm sorry for that. Yeah, so maybe we could discuss it after the event if you like to, but for now we have to close the event. So thank you very much for the audience here in the room, for your interest. Thank you for all the participants which were online, and thank you, a very big thank you for all the panelists that participated. And you can be sure that we'll keep one eye or even two eyes on this very important issue, and that we will consider the proposal made by Trudy, and we'll keep on working on this issue. So thank you very much.